This morning, I'd like to share one of my favorite UU stories. But before I start, I have a few disclaimers. I move fluidly between my own words and those of the main character for cohesive flow. I'm acknowledging this now at the beginning rather than during the sermon. Also, during the part of this story taking place in the 80s, I use the term gay as an umbrella term for historical accuracy, even though it would not be correct to use it in that context today. When I'm referring to current time, I use LGBTQ or queer as umbrella terms. And to give you some context about queer issues in the 80s, sometime during the Middle Ages, colonialism and Christianity fabricated homophobia. Up until then, gender and sexuality was fluid, accepted, and even celebrated. But the church made it illegal. Those beliefs came to North America in colonial times and persisted until the 20th century. At the time of our story, Stonewall was only 20 years old. It was the very beginning of gay rights. It's hardly surprising that a queer person wouldn't feel welcome in a church, even a UU congregation. And it was the height of the AIDS crisis. This story takes place in the mid-'80s in a UU congregation in Ellsworth, Maine. Gail Geisenhainer was a 38-year-old lesbian living in a small town in Maine, driving a snowplow for a living, and feeling very sorry for herself, when a friend invited her to his church. He said it was different. Her experience with churches hadn't been positive, and she rudely refused. All blanking churches are the same. They say they're open, but they don't want queer people. To heck with church. She may have used stronger language. Her friend persisted. He knew his church was different. He told her his church cared about people, embraced diverse families, and worked to make a better world. He assured her she could come and not have to hide any element of who she was. So she went. Oh, she went all right. And she dressed so carefully for her first Sunday visit. She spiked her short hair straight up into the air and dug out her heaviest, oldest work boots, the ones with the chainsaw cut that exposed the steel toe. She got her torn blue jeans and her leather jacket, what we used to call dyke finery. I think we all had that outfit. There would be not a shred of ambiguity that Sunday morning. They would embrace her in her full Amazon glory, or they could fry ice. She carefully arranged her outfit so it would highlight the rock-hard chip she carried on her shoulder. She bundled up every shred of pain and hurt and betrayal she had harbored from every other religious experience in her life, and she lumbered into that tiny meeting house on the coast of Maine. Blue jeans and boots, leather jacket, spiked hair, and belligerent attitude. She accepted her friend's invitation and went to his church. She expected the gray-haired ladies in the foyer to step back in fear. That would have been familiar. Instead, they stepped forward, offered her a bulletin, a newsletter, and invited her to stay for coffee. It was just so odd. They never even flinched. They even called her dear. Stay for coffee, dear. She stayed for coffee. She stayed for Unitarian Universalism. Over time, the good folks of that church loved up the scattered parts of her and guided her from shattered to whole, from outcast to beloved among many. And those folks listened to her. Gail and her life partner, Celeste, became their poster children for the brand new Welcoming Congregation program. And they went on to provide important local pastoral and legislative ministries to gay folks in Down East Maine. They walked together and they helped each other to grow. Now, please don't think the transition was smooth or swift. These were not imaginary superheroes. These were human beings, and this was the mid-1980s. During the worship service on her second or third Sunday, a woman stood during Joys and Sorrows to announce that all homosexuals had AIDS. All homosexuals were deviants who could not be trusted with children, public health, or civil society. All homosexuals should be quarantined, packed off to work camps, to provide useful labor for society, and keep their filthy lifestyle and deadly diseases to themselves. Alrighty then. As the member spoke, Gail slowly sat upright from her customary slouch. She tucked in her arms, looked furtively around to see who might be glaring in her direction, and she tried to remember if she had parked her car facing in or out in the parking lot. In its journey of covenant, this congregation had just stumbled onto an important crossroad. But as joys and sorrows unfolded, not one person made reference to the call to quarantine all homosexuals. The pulpit that morning was ably filled by a student from the local seminary. At the end of the sharing, the seminarian made a brief comment to ensure them that not all the sentiments voiced that morning represented the whole congregation. And that was that. At the time, what Gail remembers most was the sensation of holding her breath as she hurried out during the postlude. She ducked her head, avoided eye contact, spoke to no one, as though the shame were hers. There was a man in the foyer between her and the exit door. She quickly glanced up to his face, silently pleading for him to let her pass without more pain. He smiled, held the door open gently for her. Speaking softly, he said, "See you next week." Her head snapped up. "Excuse me," she muttered. Surely she had not heard him correctly. He gently repeated, "See you next week?" Was he mad? Was he impaired? Had he not just heard what that woman said? See you next week? It was once a question and an invitation. Gail left that week right after service. But what about the next Sunday? Would she go back? Why on earth would she go back? That would be, well, you fill in the word. Going back would be what? Dangerous, stupid, foolhardy, looking for trouble? Probably hurtful, but back she went. The next week, the regular minister was back. The service began as usual. Gail tensed up when joys and sorrows were announced. Someone announced something like a birthday. She couldn't fully remember. But she vividly remembered as one by one, folks of that congregation stood up and awkwardly announced that not everything said last week was right or true or representative of who they were as a Unitarian Universalist congregation. Something wonderful happened that Sunday morning in Maine, although at the time it didn't feel very good. That congregation in Ellsworth, Maine, chose to journey into its covenant, and they had the skills to do so. The direction the congregation would take was being chosen. This congregation would not be stuck in conflict, mired in name-calling, or diverted from its gentle, steady trek toward building the beloved community. Their aspirations were unfolding one voice at a time. That congregation had reached a crossroad where one among them had begun the use of language that would depersonalize and endanger others. She tried to create a class of less than human persons towards whom violence would be acceptable. The congregation gently refused to follow. But an even more extraordinary and wonderful thing had happened. The congregation refused to depersonalize, refused to dehumanize the original speaker. The congregation stayed in an I-thou relationship with her. They did not start calling her names, that homophobe, that gay basher. None of that happened. While the speaker tried to turn homosexuals into objects to be manipulated, the congregation never referred to the speaker in a way that was less than embracing and respectful of her full humanity. And Gail, in the moment that the man in the foyer looked at her and said, "See you next week," Gail saw his soft smile, gentle words, and direct eye contact. Theirs was an I-thou encounter, the very thing that Gail had been seeking. Gail was in the throes of learning her first lessons of being in covenant with the congregation. When we covenant to walk together through all that life brings, it means when things get ugly, we don't walk away. Oh, we may want to walk away, but our covenant calls us to abide and work things through. Gail's friend was right. His church was different. He did forget to tell her that at his church, some Sundays, she could be in for a wild, wild ride. But he was right. His church really cared about making things right for everybody. Something wonderful happened that Sunday morning in Maine. So whatever happened to Gail Geisenhainer? Did she become the greatest snowplow driver in Maine? When something wonderful happens, it tends to spread. 10 years after she walked into that congregation in Ellsworth, Maine, she became an ordained UU minister. 10 years after that, she gave a sermon based on her first UU encounter at General Assembly in front of over 3,000 people. It is generally considered one of the finest sermons ever delivered there. Her partner, Celeste DeRoche, was just as active in Unitarian Universalism. She's known for her work detailing Unitarian Universalist history, primarily identifying the first out gay and lesbian UU ministers. And because of her work, I know that something else wonderful was going on that Sunday in Maine. Just down the road a bit in Augusta, our congregation there was being led by the Reverend Douglas Morgan Strong, the first openly gay Unitarian Universalist minister. This was Unitarian Universalism's blessing, all because Gail came back next week. As we heard in this morning's reading, often conflict is reactive. People say and do things before they've had a chance to process their emotions or to understand the totality of the conflict. In the throes of awful moments, in the slap of insult, the realizations of injustice, disrespect, unkindness, hatred, and worse, there is a way to detect if we are off course or on course. In these terrible moments, all sense of movement stops. Instinctively, some of us begin to hold our breath. We become hyper alert to details, the sense of other, and our sense of apartness. In our story, when the attack was made, all motion in the room appeared to stop. Gail hurried from the building, nearly holding her breath. Then the fellow at the door said, "See you next week?" At once a question and an invitation, at once an acceptance of the reality that she might not come back. "See you next week?" She exhaled, the saving power of breathing. Her first lesson on the beloved community, where we walk together through all that life brings, just enough to keep us in motion, to keep us in conversation. Now, I hate conflict. I prefer to just ignore it and hope it goes away. Except that never works. Even worse, it can lead to conflicts being buried and then popping back up with amplified emotion. If handled correctly, conflict, even ugly, hurtful conflict, can become a blessing. I've seen it happen here in our own congregation. A few years ago, a couple of our queer members were deeply hurt by the actions of some other members. To make it worse, our leadership, including me as a board member, didn't handle the conflict well. Suddenly, old hurts and slights were no longer dormant. It easily could have divided our congregation, I them, instead of I we. Our minister helped gradually turn things around. We talked, we listened, we talked and listened over and over again. As a result, we saw new programs. We were already designated as a welcoming congregation, and over the next 2 years, we started a small group ministry for LGBTQ members and allies, added more LGBTQ services to our calendar, activated our social action team, installed a pride flag at the entrance to the sanctuary, added our pronouns to our new name tags, and started using our pronouns when we introduced ourselves, made our bathrooms gender neutral, started a queer social group, offered transitioning and name changing ceremonies for the greater community. Most importantly, we started the tradition of closing our building for Pride Sunday and attending Pride in place of our usual Sunday service. A sea of yellow UU Side with Love shirts marching together, a statement of solidarity and affirmation. And we saw an increase in LGBTQ visitors, primarily young transgender adults. This was our blessing. None of this would probably have occurred if that hurtful action hadn't happened, and if we hadn't had someone in our congregation to walk us towards healing. Something wonderful had happened here too. Unlike some congregations, the one in Ellsworth, Maine, had the skills to journey into covenant. They had built a strong covenant together, crafted, voted on, and pledged to follow. So when conflict arose, as it always does, their covenant called them to stay and work it through. Here at UU Catskills, we too are growing into that strength. Over the past year, members have developed a safe congregation policy, created teams, and arranged training. Our healthy relationship team, HEART, will continue guiding us into stronger, healthier ways of being together. As Reverend Margret said in her sermon last week, covenants are how we agree to live in relationship and in community. They are promises we freely choose, and they unite us as a community of faith, a community of connection, a community of love. Revisiting and updating covenants is a common and important practice among UU congregations. We have already begun the work of shaping a new one. Last Sunday, many of us gathered after worship in a listening circle to share the values that form the core of our faith. We will continue this process in the year ahead until we can all commit to a new covenant together. And next week, Reverend Margret will preach on welcoming and belonging. She is offering an important training after the service to help us all explore the subtle nature of bias and learn to express true inclusion, to learn how we can all be truly welcoming, to become healthier, to be stronger in community, and to prepare to meet rising storms. Something wonderful can happen here again. As Reverend Tandy Rogers reminds us, conflict can invite self-awareness, compassion, and courage. It can reveal where our values are strong and where they still need to grow. Conflict is rarely comfortable, but it is faith formation. It is sacred work. When engaged with care, it becomes one of our fiercest and most faithful teachers. Within our own religious communities, we have all too many breath-stopping moments. We stay stuck in the conflict. We lose sight of our larger aspirations. We forget to include one another on the list of folks to respect. Sometimes we all too cavalierly toss around flippant comments that hit like nerve bombs. When we depersonalize and demean one another, most anything that follows will be flawed in some way. When we catch ourselves out of rhythm with our values, We can stop and rebalance. We can backtrack, retreat to the last place on the path where we remember regarding one another with goodwill. This is a spiritual practice. We are here to practice this faith with all its rigorous demands. We are here to build this faith, expanding its broad possibilities. We are here to celebrate living. We are here to make life easier. Wonderful things just don't happen on Sundays in Maine. Let us build a beloved community that respects the labors and aspirations of the past, but trusts the dawning future more. Let us build our own wonderful moments. See you next week.